I certainly say, Madam Speaker, and I think Oregonians will agree with me.
Political bodies exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of
Show me the money. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about revenue.
We wouldn't be talking about revenue if we could reduce the money spent in Ways and Means.
Amen.
You're jumping forward to the next episode.
Okay.
That's money out. Today's money in.
Yeah. So actually, you're going to be the guest too, right?
Well,
Representative Smith's going to come back.
No.
he's coming back. He's I'm going to host, and we're going to have the vice chairs of the Ways and Means Committee, Senator Fred Gerard and Representative Greg Smith. And we're going to interview these guys because they have been Ways and Means stalwarts for
a little while.
20 years?
Except for 2007, when Senator Merkley took me off the committee and put me on the Environment Committee.
Not that we're holding a
That's
grudge.
called punishment.
It was punishment. You have to hear this, though. I know it's not due to revenue, but you got to hear this.
Yeah.
So I'm on the House floor, and I decide during a remonstrance to share my opinion of the Speaker of the House, of which I then am removed from my Ways and Means assignments, put on the Environment Committee. And if I'm lying, I'm dying. There was the chair, the vice chair, a member, another member, 2 empty seats, and then my name. So when I showed up, I was put at the very end, separate from the group. I think that they were sharing a message with me.
I think the message was he did not like your remonstrance.
I think you're correct. And I remember we were talking about emissions. And I decided while everyone was talking about the future of electric vehicles and what could be in the long future, I raised my hand and I said, "Excuse me, can you share with me how I'm going to drive my 1-ton diesel with a trailer on it, carrying my 6 four-wheelers?" And the chair of the committee looked at me and just shook her head. That was my environment.
That was your input.
Yes.
I love it.
Well, today you're on the Revenue Committee in the House.
Yes, I am. I've served on that committee for probably way too long, but it's given me a chance to understand what's going on. I've served as vice chair of Ways and Means and now just the senior member. Oh, I keep saying Ways and Means. You're going to have to cut that. Served as the vice chair of the Revenue Committee. Now serve as the longest serving member on there. And I'll tell you what, the only reason they put me as vice chair was because I was also vice chair of Ways and Means at the same time. And I think you were there. Were you a Republican leader at that time?
I was in the past, a past life.
Well, the only reason they did that was to keep me busy, so I couldn't go off and do my, the work I like to do.
Yeah, which is getting Republican or minority member projects, which at the time, we'll talk about Ways and Means, but there are folks all over the state, and one of the jobs of the Republican leader was figuring out, okay, how do we get this clinic built in Elgin? I think, wasn't it Elgin?
It was.
Yeah,
It was.
and so I remember saying to Greg, okay, we got to help our friend here. So your job is to get him a clinic in Elgin.
That's right.
And you did.
That's right.
Yeah.
You were very you were stalwart in trying to help out the members in the caucus on that. And,
Now, earlier, Representative Smith, you looked straight at the camera and you said, we're going to have to edit that out. We don't edit these.
We don't edit.
We're free flowing. We're authentic.
Did we
see,
forget to
we
tell
are.
that? Did we forget to tell you that?
I think so.
Oh,
The challenge is
Cut. Line.
I cut in between revenue and Ways and Means, and I confuse them sometimes. So
Yeah.
I
They're
blur
so
the lines.
interconnected, though, like
Yeah.
they are.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
makes sense. And you serve on both.
I
And you
do.
have for a while.
A long time, and you find yourself blurring the lines, and then you also find yourself saying, especially when you're in revenue, why are we raising this money when we could be reducing over here? With just a little bit of prioritization, you wouldn't have to spend so much.
Well, and your
Yeah.
district is a fine example of where the state has found success driving enterprise
Yes,
and actually creating jobs,
yes,
producing revenue
Yes.
with which then you get to spend.
yes. It's interesting. At the Port of Morrow, it's a special district. It's a taxing district, but they take less than 0.10% of 1% in property taxes. And the only reason they collect that money is so they can maintain their special district status. But other than that, they generate revenue.
Yeah.
And here's the interesting part. If we didn't have ballot measure 5, if that was replaced, the folks in Morrow County would be walking on gold-plated sidewalks. But because of ballot measure 5, we don't. But you know what? Ballot measure 5 has been very, very useful in controlling property tax rates. And so you
Yeah.
really have to have that deep conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're talking about money in, and thank you, leader. Oh, captain, my captain, leader, Senator Daniel Bonham.
Well, Honorable Senator Mike McLane, who is now the vice chair of the Finance and Revenue Committee in the Senate.
Yes, I'm the vice chair, and I wield a massive authority in the Senate Finance and Revenue Committee.
We love that.
Have you ever noticed he's on every important committee there is? How does a freshman senator get appointed to every awesome committee?
Knowing where the bodies are buried.
So I've got 4 pillars of taxation that I'm going to throw at you. The first we've kind of alluded to, property tax,
Yes.
income tax,
Yep.
sales tax. Ooh, wait a second. Oregon doesn't have a sales tax. Or does it?
Or does it?
And then business tax. So the first thing that popped up in a conversation I was having this morning, future guest Jason Williams from the Oregon Taxpayers, he's going to be a fantastic guest when we bring him in the future. He came and presented, and I want to share with you, and we'll throw this slide up for the viewers, this income tax rate and at what level Oregonians are taxed. And I think most people are going to be shocked to know that the top rate being 9.9% kicks in when you make $125,000. The second lowest rate that is applied to Oregon income tax is 8.75%. And when do you think that kicks in? I would love to just pause for half a second and make the viewer think about that. If 125 is the top line, what's the second line?
Well, you got it right here in front of us. It's $10,750, which means if you make $1 more than that, you're paying 8.75% of your hard-earned money in income tax. And I'll tell you what, you were raising this issue earlier. That really hits our middle class. And then you've got the 125,000 at 9.9%. And I know 125,000 is a lot of money, but in today's day and age, that's middle class income. You take a husband and wife, and husband's driving truck or doing forklift, and the wife is teaching at the elementary school. You're making more than that, and now you're paying the highest tax rate.
Yeah,
in
not
the
even
state of
counting.
Oregon.
Yeah, when you think about the rates in Oregon as an income tax state, you add that up, and then of course we're talking about money in. How does Oregon get its money in? And so that we can talk about ways in which we're going to have to do correction to Oregon and its insatiable appetite for mission creep. But one thing I'd love to talk about is what is the money in? And as you said, sometimes, I don't know, people who generate the money may have a better idea of how it should be spent. And but the rates start 0 to 4,500 or 4,300. I don't have my glasses on. 4.75%. So Oregon taxes you on the first dollar you make.
Yep.
And then it goes from at 4,300 to 10,750. It's 6.75. I think I'm reading that right. And then between 10,750 and 125,000 is 8.75. And when I think about, okay, you got people paying federal tax. Now, federal tax has a higher exemption. People are also paying payroll tax, and they don't think about it. But when you have your Social Security deduction, Medicare, all that, or in essence, payroll tax, your employer's also paying that. So that has effect of when people think of the rates. Like, I know this seems a bit nerdy, but let's say you're making $50,000 and you look at your deductions. Well, your employer's paying 8% roughly payroll tax. So that employer could be paying you $54,000.
Right.
That's how much it's costing them to pay you 50 because they got to pay payroll tax. Then you pay payroll tax, which is a total of, I think, 16%. And you're paying income tax to the state. And you're paying tax to the federal government.
Right.
And,
That's right.
of course, you might pay a fee here and there, like on your gas. And I mean, and when it adds up, I think few people realize how expensive our governments have become.
Well, and the worst part is the user fees. Folks want to go use a state park or they want to go raft down a river. You have to get a permit. They call it a permit. Or you go into the park and they call it a user fee. But the reality is that's a tax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So of the $59 billion that we raise in other funds, the question that I've not been able to get answered, because some of that money does flow sideways, and I know we're
Most
getting into ways and
definitely.
means, but how much of that is new money
Right.
in licensing fees, in fee for service, whatever it might be, permits, whatever? How much of that is new income in? And I can't get that answer. I've been asking for a while.
And I'm not sure I have it either, but it's significant. We all know it is.
Yeah.
And I think part of what the agencies want to do is keep that hidden because that's the source of money they're able to advance their agenda with. Those other funds.
Just a great example is, and we're going to go over later in these future episodes, agency by agency, looking at the sheer volume of regs they have, what their budget is, what they spend on all sorts of programs, and then what they charge in fees. And you have this year, for an example, DOGE, or the Department of GOME, but what is it? Geology
industry.
Yeah. And they want a 300% fee increase. And of course, it's paid by the folks who are regulated by DOGE, but still, it's 300% increase in fees.
Right.
And so I don't know if a lot of Oregonians, I mean, they do connect the dots, but they don't necessarily connect the dots directly. But wait a second, if DOGE is raising fees, well, that's paid for by, right, the gravel pit or whatever. It's like, no, they're not in there. They're not a charity. They have employees, they have costs, and those costs then are passed on. So when industry comes and says, we need to raise our fees, it does make it more expensive. Now, for all Oregonians, because it raises the cost of our roads and construction and the like. And I know that, there's always reasons, inflation or this, that, and next thing. But I won't steal the thunder on some of these future episodes, but we're going to dive down into these agencies and say, well, where are you spending money? And ask Oregonians if that's how they want their money spent.
I have to share with you. You brought up DOGE. When you explore them in a future episode, ask them about their promise to the Oregon Concrete and Aggregate folks just a few sessions back. The industry folks agreed to an additional fee, and it was a significant fee at the time, but they said they would not be raising it for a decade plus. And what did they do? They turn right around.
Yeah.
And they're raising it. So
300%. I flagged them in part because it's one of the bigger fee increases we're seeing. But Daniel, you brought out a chart here.
Well,
and
you were talking about the impact of federal taxation, and you mentioned deductions. We can certainly throw this up on the screen, but it kind of walks through what the federal government allows, what the state government allows. It gets a little crazy, but we have the ability within the state of Oregon to connect to that federal system or to disconnect from
or
it.
to disconnect.
Yeah. And so some of these items we have kind of touched and engaged with, and some others we have pushed away from. and we have the opportunity, really every cycle to come back and say, do we want to connect? Do we want to disconnect? So I think it not necessarily even to spur discussion, but something to showcase to the audience. We can put it up as a graphic and just show them what that looks like and how the state of Oregon approaches your income and how the federal government approaches it and what they allow you to deduct, what they allow you to consider to mitigate your tax obligation.
What amazes me is every session there's a discussion on the home interest deduction.
Every time.
And I just can't imagine why anyone would take that away from homeowners. I mean, the cost of living in your home is so expensive already. Taking that away makes it nearly even more impossible for folks to get into a home or to keep their home.
And I do think that's a whole other conversation, but this is part of it, right? As we're talking about how we tax people. And again, I've got another map I'll throw up there, show the folks. We're the 4th highest income tax rate in the nation behind California, Hawaii, New Jersey at 9.9%.
That's probably why wealth is leaving the state. I mean, you just look at it right there.
That's a good point. In what's not counted, I mean, the Department of Revenue can track when a taxpayer exits. Mm-hmm. But what they can't track is when a taxpayer never comes. And this is a great example. If you're looking at locating a manufacturer, a call center, whatever it is, and you're looking at a state and you're saying, hey, I'm really excited we want to get to a state that is, people can recreate, and Oregon has so many tremendous offerings. They used to call it the second paycheck. You remember that? Mm-hmm. And it was like, well, Oregonians get a second paycheck that's not counted as they get to live in Oregon. And there's some truth to that, but I always found that a bit offsetting. But if you locate in a state that doesn't have an income tax as a basis for it, and you pay someone, let's say it's an engineer that works for you, and you pay her $100,000 a year. Okay, under this system of tax, 8.7% of that tax, I'm just going to call it 8% because it ratio just to round up. She's making $92,000 after paying tax, right? You locate that same call center or whatever in a state that doesn't have an income tax, she's making $100,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
And so employers who I've talked with over the years talk about our tax situation, and they factor that in. And we don't track that because they never come here.
That's right.
And the question that gets begged to be asked is, what have we missed out by having a tax that's so high in on income? Aren't you supposed to, you tax what you want less of is the theory.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
to a
and
certain
it's so obvious when you go to our border cities, go over to Meridian in Idaho, and you will see Oregon company after Oregon company that left and went to Idaho. You go over to Milton Freewater, you see the exact same thing. As soon as you cross state line, you see the Costco's and the new hotels and the, all those type of amenities. You come back on state line, back into Milton Freewater, and the economy's struggling. Mm-hmm. And it's because of that income tax rate. The business owners will tell you that.
Right.
Yeah, because it's not just the owner's income. We all know is that they're looking and saying, how do I attract great talent?
Yeah.
And of course, people are smart enough to just go, wait a second, if I'm located in Oregon, I'm paying tax. Now, the contra argument is, yeah, but there's no sales tax. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's meaningful. And people say, great, I don't have to have sales tax. And but as we know, we do have a sales tax. It's just called different.
What do we call it?
Corporate activities tax.
But what's the inside baseball name that we used in the building to pass that tax?
Student Success Act.
the Student Success Act that became the corporate activity tax in the
You want to know the biggest scam of that, my friend?
Please.
This is the biggest scam. We call it the corporate activity tax to sell it to Oregonians, but the reality is that tax is on all businesses. Whether you're a sole proprietor, an LLC, a partnership, you're getting hit by this. And I'll never forget being on that committee. I was vice chair of that committee. And I asked Chris Alanak, who at the time was still is the director, or, the
Legislative revenue main guy.
And I just point blank looked at him and I said, why are we calling this a corporate activity tax when we know it impacts others? And he looked at me and I could just tell he couldn't give me the straight answer because he was being told by the chairs, we will call this a corporate activity tax.
Well, don't you remember we tried to change it? Like we Republicans in the House, we tried to kept calling it the commercial activity tax.
Yes.
Because we wanted to make that point that if you're engaged in commerce, this is hitting you. And we talked about the pyramiding and how, you're paying that 0.57 at every step along the supply chain. So by the time it rolls up to the consumer has no idea how much tax they've paid
That's right.
to receive that good at the end of the day.
That's right. Another hidden tax was the increase in the minimum wage. Just think about that. I mean, that is an indirect way of taxing business and small business and taking from one group of people and giving it to another.
So one of the things that I have here today is a chart that was given to me by the Director of Revenue, Betsy Imholtz. And Betsy used to be the Chief of Staff for Senator Peter Courtney, the longtime serving Senate President. And I was the House leader, and I worked a lot with her and Peter Courtney. We had a common foe at the time, House Democrats. And so, but it was, so Betsy was great to work with. And so she had mentioned a chart to me, and I said, hey, can I get a copy of the chart? And what it is, it lays out all the different taxes that are administered by the Oregon Department of Revenue. Not all of them are the income tax. That's the biggest one. But a lot of times the Department of Revenue is administering a tax from a local business that goes to the county. So, but anyway, here's her chart. I'm going to stand up because...
Get ready, folks.
All right. Oh, well, wait a sec. I'm going to sit back down. Our camera guy just looked at me and said, what are you doing? So here's the chart.
Get ready.
This is the chart of all the taxes in Oregon that are administered by the Department of Revenue.
Thing's 3 feet tall.
It is tall. Interesting thing is you can go down this list and you see all the different taxes. Now, we talked about the income tax, but what we didn't talk about is municipalities,
Right.
TriMet, counties can lop on in their own income tax, which the consumer or the taxpayer in Oregon, when you add it up, our highest tax city is living in Portland.
Right.
In fact, I heard that the only people in America paying higher taxes than if you're in the city of Portland, making over $250,000, is someone in New York City who makes over $25 million a year.
Wow.
So, but if you look at all these taxes, is that we administer in Oregon, and you can see some of these. And again, this chart's helpful, but eye-opening. Vehicle use tax, statewide transit tax, the vehicle privilege tax. Do you know we have a privilege tax in Oregon?
Mm-hmm.
It's a tax on sale of motor vehicles on vehicle dealers.
1%, right?
Well, or is it 0.5%, I think,
Is
of
it
a new
0.5%?
car? And then on top of that, you still got to pay your corporate activity tax.
That's right.
And
And you got to pay to license the vehicle, and you got to register it.
Yeah, and so it's incredibly
And
interesting.
now we're considering a tire tax.
a tire tax.
Good Lord.
I mean, how in the world
Yeah.
can they introduce that?
A tire tax, a privilege tax. Privilege, by the way. You know, the names, people who come up with these names, we got to give them an award. The Student Success Tax Act was really a consumption tax. And then we also have, of course, a corporate income tax, a corporate excise tax, estate tax. We'll talk about a partnership privilege tax, and it's the minimum tax for partnerships transacting business in Oregon, and pass-through entity tax, fiduciary income tax, and of course we have our withholding tax. We have in the income we have a state marijuana retail tax, and forest products harvest tax. And this tax is a tax per feet of timber harvested and privilege tax. Now, ironically, don't you probably have to cut some timber to tax that. There's
Yeah, you really think about that, Mike? Think about the disincentive in the timber industry. You're already fighting to be able to harvest one of your resources. And then once you're able to do that, you get taxed on it.
You're taxed on that. This one, and I don't, I know this directly affects you, a psilocybin tax. And that's for the retail sale of
Thanks
psilocybin.
for letting that out, Mike.
Yeah. Shroom, Greg, Shroom. No, but obviously people use psilocybin for all sorts of medicinal and other types of therapies, but we tax that. Oregon food processor. There's an A&T map maintenance tax, a kratom tax. I didn't know this. It's an annual registration fee for kratom producers.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Paid Leave Oregon, of course, was another program started, and that's withhold everyone unemployment insurance tax. Everyone who's employed pays into it for unemployment insurance for the occasion when they.
But only the employer pays. Employees don't pay that tax.
Okay, so I'm sorry.
Business owners pay that tax.
Just business owners, and it's for somebody when they lose their job and they didn't choose to lose their job.
Through no fault of their own.
No fault of their
word.
own.
Yep.
They lose their job. But I think there's a bill in the Senate that's going to extend that to Senate Bill 916. I know you know something about that.
Yeah,
Tell us a little bit about that one.
We're going to allow for people who are choosing to walk away from their employment and go on strike. So electively choosing to walk away from a current stable employment status to protest their employer in some mechanism, whether it's, quality of work or workspace or pay or some other benefit. And they want to be able to get unemployment benefit while they walk away from their job.
So obviously people go on strike, and that's legal. I'm not, when it comes to private trades, I support collective bargaining. That's their choice, and they do great work. But if they go on strike, we'd pay that. The thing that troubles me is this also applies to public employees.
First state in the nation that's going to do that. New York right now, it's illegal. They had passed the Taylor Act a few years back that kind of created a statewide level workforce standards board-esque group that sits, at the top of the executive branch and deals with these issues. And in exchange for that, they agreed that they could not strike as a public labor union. And then in New Jersey, the only two states that currently allow for this practice to take place, the law is silent, but effectively every jurisdiction that's had an employment base that was unionized walk out and strike, they've gone to the court, and the court has filed an injunction to force them back to work. Because the argument is, if the state's paying for the service that you're providing, you're working for the public, we as a state have decided that the benefit that you deliver to the public is of public interest, then it's essential. And if it's essential, then you can't walk away from it. So every time teachers or transit workers have tried to strike, the courts have come back and said, no, get back to work. And so here in Oregon, we're the first to say, we don't even care about that. If the labor union wants to protest and walk out, and again, I do have a lot of sympathy. I know these processes take a lot of time and energy and effort to lead up to a collective bargaining agreement. It's not weeks that go into this, it's months that go into it. And so when you hit a point of impasse, the question is this action with 916, are we putting our thumb on the scale of the balance of the bargaining table? And I think we are.
Question.
And I think it is a question that currently the majority party that's putting this forward in the Senate is going to have to ask. And we're going to answer that question. We're recording this Wednesday evening, and we're doing that tomorrow, Thursday. So we'll find out soon enough what they think the answer is to whether or not that imbalance that we're creating is appropriate or not.
Well, and it creates a pool. I mean, when you pay into it, it's a pool to provide. So obviously it's going to be diminishing the pool, which then has the effect of potentially raising rates for everyone else. All right, moving on to, we have a loaded tank rail car fee, petroleum load fee. I guess that's when you load petroleum.
I wonder where that money goes.
Well, it's interesting. DEQ and the fire marshal, it's distribution established each biennium by the legislature. So anyway, there's so many fees and taxes. The TriMet transit payroll tax. There's self-employment tax, and they have local marijuana retail tax along with the state one. You've got small tract severance east tax, a small tract severance west tax.
You know, Mike, you talked about that local tax on marijuana. You know, many of the communities are so desperate to try and provide their services that they agreed to that tax. For many of them, it goes against their moral value, but they're choosing it so they can try to keep their activities going. I'm proud of Morrow County. We haven't passed that tax,
Right.
and I'm proud of Hermiston and District 57 because they've chosen not to as well.
Yeah.
The heavy equipment rental tax, and that's a tax on the rental price for heavy equipment. Now, that is administered by the Department of Revenue, but goes to counties. So, you know, when you rent heavy equipment.
Yep, Representative Greg Barretto works so hard in opposition.
Yeah. Here's one, an amusement device tax, which conjures all sorts of things, but it's actually an annual tax on business owners of lottery game terminals.
Okay.
And anyway, a lot of these taxes, but you know, Oregonians, when they see a argument being presented and people are saying, "Hey, I don't want to raise the rate," or they see opposition because it's just this little piece. We're just asking for this little raise of revenue here. The collective effect is, you know, that old story, you boil a frog by putting the frog in water and then you raise it 1 degree at a time, is the collective effort of the state of Oregon and counties and cities, et cetera, is that it just keeps growing more. I'd love to find out when was the last time the state of Oregon, or frankly, it's the counties lowered taxes. And I remember in 2013 we passed a bill in the grand bargain, and we lowered income tax on K1s because we were trying to stimulate because you were coming out of the recession, and I believe that's the last time we actually lowered a tax. And but you know, people get frustrated. And then when you're faced with an argument, why would you oppose this? I always think of the accumulation, the cumulative effect of all these taxes.
That's what I was thinking. Back to your scenario of that individual earning $100,000. After that list, after everything they've had to utilize during a month, what do you think that falls to?
I wish I knew.
I don't know.
Well,
That's a
including
great
a
question.
paddle board over 9 feet that now is a water recreational vehicle that you
Right.
have to pay a license to use. And so the 15-year-old that wants to paddleboard on the Columbia River and Hood River, is going to have to pay a fee.
If it's over 9 feet.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
I got it.
remember you adamantly fighting that
Oh my
line.
gosh.
All of us did.
So the cat tax, here we're going to go to a new segment. It's called Quiz Time. That doesn't exist, but it could.
There you go. That'd be
Quiz
part
time.
of your show.
So the cat tax, does
Corporate
the
activities.
corporate activities tax,
Business tax.
Honorable Representative Smith, do I have to be profitable to pay that tax?
No, sir. No, sir. All you have to do is have a income over $1 million. Doesn't matter whether you've made money or not, you're still going to pay it.
So if I'm a startup restaurant and I hire 30 people and I spend, $800,000 on food and I've got $800,000 worth of payroll and I'm earning 1.4 on my 1.6 of cost, I'm losing 200,000, but I'm in my first year and I think I can make a go of this if I just can get to year 10. You're telling me I'm paying a tax now, even though I'm losing money?
Welcome to Oregon. Yes.
Yeah, and what's so interesting, I think about that restaurant and the restaurant owners and just how hard it is, that industry. I remember former state rep Sherry Helt used to say that I don't, remember the spatula and her story that she would tell her employees when they get to the bottom of the soup pot, for the evening, she would say, get the spatula out. In other words, she said in the restaurant business, they don't, they measure inches and cents. In other words, it's such a tough business.
Yeah.
And so let's say in your scenario, what you don't know is you're also paying the gross receipts tax on the delivery of lettuce
Right.
and buns and the hamburger, right? Because at every chain in the distribution of that hamburger, when it hits the plate, at every time it changes hands, the commercial activity tax, the corporate activity tax now, comes in to put on 0.57. And so by the time that hamburger gets to your plate, consumers in Oregon don't really know that they have an effect, a sales tax, but it's hidden in,
Right.
and they have no idea what it is. I have no idea what it is.
Well, the cost of eggs is a funny one, too. We've been talking about eggs a lot since this last election. I think it was an example a lot of politicians were using, like, oh my gosh, look at the cost of eggs. It's been driven up. And we say, oh, this is national inflation. These are other things. But we passed a very specific bill that limited the way you could raise chickens.
That's right. That's good memory.
Chicken bill.
That's right.
Yeah. We said they got to be cage free.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what does that do? It puts them outside, out of protection. Next thing you know, one of these chickens gets the bird flu because they're not in a protected environment. And that bird spreads to other birds. And now you got half your chicken supply you got to destroy because it's got the bird flu. And there's only half as many chickens producing half as many eggs.
That's right.
What's going to happen to the cost of the eggs?
That's right.
Yeah, and obviously there's all sorts of contributing factors, but it's just simple things that more regulation, which is needed, and then expanded, and then an intervening event comes, we just realize, but for that latter part, there's consequence, but in the end, tax. And when the egg producer sells to the egg wholesaler, taxed. When the wholesaler distributes to the restaurant, Elmer's Pancake House, taxed. When Elmer's Pancake House sells it to you when you sit down and enjoy your hash and eggs taxed. And that's not counting the income tax, which, as you said before, we're one of the highest in the country.
And we keep forgetting, we're talking Oregon income tax. This is done at the federal level as well. And so now it's multiplied by 2 or greater.
Right.
I'm going to read you just a snippet from when Bi-Mart closed all their pharmacies. They had a bunch of reasons that they listed. The last one, bullet point, the Oregon corporate activity tax takes even more, taxing us on receipts rather than just profits. And this is on a top 3 list of the reasons why they went out of business. And so we're looking at rural Oregon and we're saying, what happened to our pharmacies? What happened to our access to healthcare? And this is something we can point directly at and say, this was a problem. We're still taxing feminine hygiene products. We're still taxing a lot of medical supplies, period. And we have multiple bills, and I don't know, do you have them in the House? I think we have some in the Senate that are considering whether or not the corporate activity tax should apply to those things, which is something that happens every time you have a sales tax, right? The special interests show up.
That's right.
And a lot of these are good reasons, right? Like you can easily say, well, you know, it's not fair for the 15-year-old young lady that has to use these products. She has to use them. She doesn't have the choice of whether or not to use them. And so taxing it is an undue burden. And that's what happens every time you get a state with a sales tax is the special interest comes in and says, well, you don't want to tax Band-Aids. Like surely when someone's cut, you don't want to tax them for having to, secure their wound. And so then what's the consistency? What's the approach? How do you make this fair? If you have special interests that can afford the lobbyists to come show up and carve themselves out of the tax that they maybe or maybe not supported yesterday for the good of the whole.
Right.
Because it was for the students.
Right.
Student success. We're going to have an episode on education and ask that question.
You got to
How
go back
did
to
we
the
do?
pharmacy really quick. So we've got a corporate activity tax of over 1 million, business income tax,
Gross receipts.
gross receipts. And pharmacies are managed by pharmacy benefit boards. And so the price that they can charge for medicine is controlled by the state. So they're controlled by the state on what they can charge. And as soon as they hit 1 million, they're taxed. How do our rural pharmacies stay in business? They can't. They can't.
Well, it's incredibly tough. And we had a pharmacist from Hepner testify.
Murray's Drugs.
Yeah. And Anne Murray testified and was talking about margins and the Medicaid bit, go down the list, right? But
Well, those pharmacy benefit managers, that's a discussion for another day. They impact rural pharmacies. Again, Murray's Drugs doesn't have the volume to make up for the price setting that occurs by the PBMs. But again, as soon as they hit that 1 million, whether they've made a profit or not, they're taxed.
I asked the OEA lobbyist who testified against that specific bill and has testified against every adjustment of the Student Success Act. And I asked, are you testifying against everything? And, that's his job. But his job was anything that would reduce the amount is a disservice to Oregon kids. Mm-hmm. And so that's the positioning they have when they look into the face of a pharmacist who's saying, I'm one of the only pharmacists within X amount of miles, a lot of miles. And if we can't stay in business, who's going to supply, drugs? Because a lot of people, when they get their prescriptions, they got to meet with a pharmacist and they got to discuss it. And they said, well, who does that service? And anyway, that's the cat tax. But I don't want to cut you off, but I'd love to talk about the estate tax.
I was just about to say that.
You and I, man.
We were on the same page because
brothers.
we've got some slides on the
Yeah.
estate tax. Because one of the things we've talked about is what drives people out of a state. We've talked about taxation. We've talked about just the general business environment, which is tied to both taxes and regulatory environment, the ability to source your staff and your labor. But here in Oregon, we have an estate tax that is triggered at $1 million. The federal government is what, 13?
Yeah, I think something like that. I know I had Mac Smith from my office research this, and he's putting together some slides. And Matt, could you put up the slide where it shows where the rates begin? Okay, there we go.
Boom.
So if you are in Oregon and you have an estate of less than $1 million, you don't pay any state tax. And I believe the exemption may be about 16, maybe 10. I can't remember off the top of my head. But in Oregon, unlike most other states, which do not have an estate tax or what they call a death tax. And so this happens when somebody dies, and then there's the legal process where you go through and names are changed on accounts and et cetera. And Oregon is one of the states that assesses a tax. And just so that people know, from the first million, 1 million to 1.5 million, you're paying 10% to Oregon of tax. So you accumulate this wealth. So it's after tax money. So bottom line is you've been paying taxes on it. It's your home, et cetera. You are leaving it to your kids or your grandkids. So at 1.5 to 2.5, it's 10.25, and it scales up to, if you have over 9.5 million, it's 16%. And of course, we're having this discussion and recognizing that a lot of people in Oregon, and I would think most, the asset that's the most valuable when they pass away is their home.
Yeah.
And a lot of these homes are pushing $1 million.
So I did the math a couple weeks ago in my district. I've got Hood River, and Hood River is a really high-priced community to live in. The average home that was on the market, again, not necessarily the average home, period, but the average home that was on the market that was currently listed, if you added them all up, divided them by the number, it was $987,000 for the average home that was on the market.
Wow.
So immediately, if you're that homeowner, if you have any other asset and you happen to die, this is triggered.
So what happens though when that's triggered, but the person who receives the inheritance doesn't have cash? What do they have to do?
Going to liquidate.
They got to liquidate.
Sell it or
so
get a loan against it.
So play through that further. What happens to our farmers? Yeah, quite often our farmers are land rich, cash poor, and when grandma or grandpa pass away, many of those farms have to be sold, or they have to be split up.
And it became so bad. I think, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was Representative Vicky Berger and others came up about a decade ago with raising that exemption if it's an active farm to try to give some relief.
Right.
And but it's still difficult because
but we know story after story of farms that have had to be sold simply for the ability to generate cash to meet this obligation.
Yeah, and it makes me think about, okay, what is the consequence if somebody is, let's say they have a business and they're looking and saying, look, if I have a net worth of, $11 million, and I know that sooner or later I exit the earth and I want to leave an inheritance for my children and grandchildren. So you take that 11 million, you get an exemption on the first million, you're taxed on the 10 million. And so let's say it scales up to 16%, but let's say we're going to round it to say 12% at net effect between 1 million and 11 million. So 10 million being taxed. That means they're paying $1.2 million to the state of Oregon. And if they move to Idaho,
Right.
zero.
Zero.
If they move to Nevada, zero.
Zero.
Hell, if they move to California, zero. I think Washington just instituted an estate tax at a much smaller rate, but you know, that's a significant amount of money. Now, we're not talking about the feds because, you know, the federal government has its own system. But if and you're going to be subject to the federal law, whether you live in Idaho, Oregon, California, Nevada, okay, Washington, everyone's subject to federal law. But Oregon has an incredibly, well, let me just say it starts to create an incentive for someone to locate in another state before they pass.
It was literally the thing that my financial planner told me: whatever you do, don't die in Oregon.
We'll play through what you just shared, Daniel, just a moment ago. You know, folks in Portland, folks in Hood River, folks in Bend.
Sisters, yeah.
Sisters are nearly hitting that 1 million mark, or easily are. So grandma passes away. You get hit with the Oregon estate tax. Oh, but the property tax doesn't go away. And so it goes back to that compounding. And so, you know, Oregon becomes a very, very expensive place to live.
And I think, you know, one of the things that, you know, as we talk about this, in part, I hope those who listen and realize it's the accumulation of all of this that begins to create this disincentive. And the estate tax is a specific one. And you can argue the theory of it, et cetera. But the fact is, we have an aging population in Oregon. We have high home values comparatively to other states. And we have people who never would have imagined they're going to bump up to the estate tax bumping up. And you have people who have quite a bit of wealth who are then thinking, do I want to die in Oregon, or should I establish residency in my senior years in another state that doesn't have the state income tax? And then Oregon gets, you know, 16% of nothing.
Yeah, you folks are focused on those who are exiting or leaving. I keep thinking about that person who inherits the 1.1 million. So now they pay the estate tax. We just talked about the property tax. They can't afford that, so they sell the home, and now they have to pay an income tax on the money they generate from
capital
home
gains.
Sale.
And there, a lot of times there's stepped up basis in certain types of planning, but you know, I it's such an interesting dilemma.
And I'm not sure many Oregonians truly understand that stacking that occurs. And at the end of the day, that million or that 100,000, that's not what it is anymore. It's significantly less.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why families can't afford to raise their kids.
Well, and people vote with their feet, though. Then I am stuck there. You're right, because I keep thinking about Multnomah County and imposing taxation on wealthy individuals in Multnomah County. And so they thought, we're going to raise this projected amount of money by adding this 1% tax on all the people that earn over this amount, and all those people left town.
That's right.
They moved to Clackamas County, they moved to Clark County in Washington. They still work, but they left, and they don't domicile there anymore. And the tax base was eliminated. And so now, where's the $100 million that we were expecting from the income from the tax that we were going to put on the wealthy? Well, the wealthy left. And if Oregon could just realize that, if we could attract business, we made the same arguments with cap and trade, right? Like, why are we sending people out of the state to produce the very product we know there's global demand for? It's not like if you shut down the cement plant. If Ash Grove goes away, do you want us to just produce the cement in China, put it on a ship, container ship, send it all the way across the Pacific Ocean, deliver it back here to where we still consume the same product? Or do you want that within the framework of our regulatory environment with people that are earning money here in Oregon, with people that are paying taxes here in Oregon, a company that's sponsoring the Little League team? Like you can take it all the way down to the local investment and the buy-in that people have in their community. And I don't know why, but in the 7 years I've been here, it's been an outright assault on farmers and anybody manufacturing something, which are the very jobs we want.
You know, it's interesting to me, and I strongly agree with what you're sharing. When you look at those marginal tax rates, the nerd in me wants to ask, what's the economic science behind those rates? Who chose them?
Yeah.
We just pulled them out of the air.
Yeah. And they haven't changed in
I think a long time.
A long time.
So the reason why we couldn't think of the federal rate is because it moves.
It moves.
And it is 13.99 million. You have a 7 million limit for gifts.
But what's the economic science behind this?
I guarantee there's none.
There's none. It's politicians who select those numbers to meet their policy needs or their policy objectives.
Well, and you know, as we think about in Oregon and how we're going to in the next decade retool our government, it's all of these things that matter. And when we think specifically about revenue in, or in essence, the taxes and fees that Oregon chooses, it makes us, frankly, lack competitiveness. And we're competing in the future, as we are today, with other states and locating great businesses that drive incomes. And, you know, we hope entrepreneurs are still eager and active, and by and large, they are. But how many times have you seen, and we all know anecdotal stories that where people who get to a certain size move out of state? And that's frustrating to me because this is a choice. Now, I did ask Mac to get us some charts on competitiveness.
Yeah.
And I thought we'd look at how Oregon compares to some of the states that we often find ourselves competing with. And so
I want to throw, while Mac's pulling that up, I want to throw three more things at us just real quick and boom, 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 not necessarily to dive into, but so we've talked about income tax. We hit on very briefly property tax, but fees are a major portion. We talked about that. Lottery funds, whether we like it or not, it's a tax. It's bringing in money. Yes, some people are playing for entertainment purposes and winning, but most people are contributing to the state.
That's right.
And then finally, Oregon right now, our federal funds that we rely on are about 35.5%.
I wonder what the
budget.
strings are too that come with that money. I wonder what those strings are.
It's definitely the most prescribed money we have, because you
Most
guys are going to
definitely.
come back with an episode where you talk about how we spend it.
Right.
But it's important to realize, okay, these are all the different ways we earn it. This is where we come into play. And the question about, what stops somebody from leaving, and I think that's where, if we can get into that slide with
I
the
think it was slide
competitiveness.
number 1.
As
on
you're bringing
your
that up,
PowerPoint.
as you're bringing that slide up, one of the things that's interesting about those federal funds is quite often they then require us to increase our revenue to access those funds. And that happens all the time. If you want to collect, I don't know, let's say federal road tax dollars, well, there's an obligation that we raise our fees. And so all of a sudden you've really, again, created a double taxation.
Our gas tax of 40 cents is the 10th highest in the nation. We're a top 10 license plate fee, vehicle title fee. We have a weight mile tax that is paid for by truckers right now. We have a constitutional obligation that's balanced between what light vehicles and heavy vehicles pay. Right now, we're out of balance, out of compliance with the Constitution, and prediction, we're going to get sued. Bike tax, $15. We're the first in the nation to tax the purchase of a bicycle and ownership of a bicycle. You mentioned the dealer privilege tax, and we have a 0.1% payroll tax that people pay into a transit fund.
Didn't we just pass some tax called the hospital provider tax.
Yes.
And that's kind of interesting. We're trying to draw those federal funds that Daniel you just brought up, but in order for us to do that, we have to pay a hospital provider tax. What do you think Oregonians think about getting taxed when they go to the hospital? Now, I understand how the tax truly works,
Right.
but at the end of the day, the patient or the consumer is going to pay it.
Right. And, the interesting thing is it's all set up, that entire hospital tax and provider tax, to get more money from the federal government.
That's right.
And, of course, Oregon, like all states, in the last 20, 30 years, has grown its state government on this pipe of federal money that has come towards us. And if that pipe, which I believe it will be, is reduced either by net effect through inflation or just by gross overall dollar reduction, it puts a huge pinch on Oregon. Now, Mac brought up a slide, Oregon tax competitiveness, and this was from...
I have to finish one more thought. Is that okay on this,
Yeah,
on this
absolutely.
podcast to do
Sure,
that?
say whatever you want.
Think through this. I try to think through processes. And so you have this hospital provider tax. We have to pass it in Oregon to raise federal funds. To do what? To pay for healthcare services, right?
Medicaid population.
Where did the feds get that money? Well, chances are they're borrowing it.
They're borrowing $1 trillion every 100 days.
So now play through that. You borrow money for infrastructure. You borrow money for things that are going to last
Right.
a long term, for assets. You don't borrow money
For services.
for services. And yet that's what we're doing.
That's what the feds have done.
And I didn't mean to get too geeky on it, but if you
No,
really
it's
think
perfect.
through this, again, the taxpayer is going to have to pay the interest on that debt for these taxes that are being raised.
But I do think most people sitting at home think, well, it's my federal tax dollars just rolling back.
Right.
They're not thinking about the overall fiscal position of the federal government and the fact that you just mentioned that we're borrowing that money.
I mean, it's a macroeconomic principle that you're sharing.
But at the end of the day, if we wanted to change Oregon and we wanted to go in a new direction, I think this list is a place to start.
Yeah. Well, so Oregon is ranked 14th in taxes per capita, and we don't have a sales tax. So most of the other states, when you talk about, they have some form of sales tax. Now, of course, we have the gross receipts tax, but we won't rehash it. Oregon ranks 12th in most expensive state to start a business. And that came from Coin, Channel 6, the CBS affiliate in Portland. 12th in most expensive state to start a business.
And then just think about the rules and regulations that go with starting a business. You add that onto this.
The top marginal tax rate, 14.69, is 49th. I think that is, that's, again, one other state is lower. That's if you look at folks in Portland because they have local taxes, et cetera.
Right.
Only beaten by rich dudes and, men and women in New York making over $25 million. The top marginal corporate tax rate, 15.7. 49th. Personal income tax progressives, we're progressives, 38.9 per $1,000 of personal income. We're 49th in that. The individual income tax, we're 40th. Estate estate tax levied, we've already talked about that. So that ranks us 49th out of 50 states. Property tax burden is 30.38 per thousand of personal income. That puts us 33rd.
Really quick on that. That's one I just focus in on. When you are in a state that requires a property tax, it means you never truly own your home.
Oh, no.
You do not. You can pay off your mortgage. You can feel secure, but you always know that property tax burden's be sitting there, and if you don't pay it, you lose your home.
So I've got a bill I bring every year that would freeze property taxes for people over 65.
That's right.
For that exact reason. I've got a friend of mine that, running my business through the course of that, met him and installed a pellet stove for him and did some brickwork for him. And oh man, he was proud of that when we were done, and it made me feel great. But we got to talking one day, and this is long before I was in politics. And he said, I'm 72 years old, retired firefighter. I've served the public most of my life. I'm living off of a pension. And my property taxes at this point are $792 a month. Now this is 15 years ago.
Right.
He happened to be one of those people that had an acre of land outside of town, got annexed into town, all of a sudden is getting taxed at a different rate. But he said, it's more than my mortgage was when I built this house.
That's right.
And I'm 72. I'm living off of a pension. I'm on a fixed income. And, it may not seem like $792 is a lot, but it is for me.
Darn right.
And I think about that all the time. And I know we get pushback from the counties and local jurisdictions saying, well, we only have so many limited ways we get to tax people. So don't freeze property tax for anybody. But it is a sincere concern I have that if you're aging and on a fixed income, we are going to tax you out of the state. And we've got people saying, well, there's opportunities to borrow through a reverse mortgage, or you can defer your tax payments. A lot of different jurisdictions have that opportunity that you defer the tax, so you don't have to pay it now, like a reverse mortgage, and someone's got to pay it back.
And there's a mortgage on that.
Right.
They put a lien on your home if you
Yeah.
take advantage of that program.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, but that's the reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, as they say, what's the famous phrase? There's only two things certain in life: death and taxes. In Oregon, we got both. We get you on this side of the grave and on the other side with that. But
I do want to point out too that 49th is not good.
no 49. That's one from the bottom.
Yeah. So let me share with you the political consequence of property taxes. So my dad and mom have been Democrats their entire life until they retired, and they realized that property tax burden was going to impact them on fixed incomes. They both have their pensions, they make good money in retirement, but that burden has changed them from being Democrats to switching their party to independent. And that's the number one issue.
Oh, they're almost here.
They're getting close. They're moving to the right side.
Well, and
But it's real. It's a real
It
issue.
is, and of course, to insure that home now is more expensive than others. We don't want to digress into the fire maps, but I personally was shocked when I got my new insurance bill.
Right.
It just skyrocketed.
Right.
And I think other people are as well. But it's, again, the accumulation of all these things. And so the Oregon, according to the publication Rich States, Poor States, Oregon's economic outlook, given all this in 2024, was 42nd. And they just looking at a lot of the taxation issues, the difficulties and the burdens of starting businesses, et cetera. And these are things that we can choose to change. Nothing that we've discussed here today is etched in concrete. We can change. And the question is whether our government or those we send to our state government have the will to change.
I look at it a different way. Are we getting the value for what we're paying for? Do you feel like the government services you're receiving are worthy of these obligations? And I don't see the value. I see we try. I see we try to do our best as legislators, as a state, but at the end of the day, we're not getting the value for what we're paying for.
Well, in the reality too, go back to the reverse of what's happening in Multnomah County. Let's say we were able to deregulate let's say we were able to lower taxes and thus invite entrepreneurs
Right.
back to Oregon.
Right.
Interestingly, we were given a pitch the other day, the Portland Diamond Project. Bring a baseball team. Can we commit to $900 million in bonding capacity to build a stadium to attract multimillionaires to pay a tax that will generate billions of dollars of new job and investment around the Tillicum Crossing downtown Portland?
Yeah, that's an interesting project. They came and talked to me about it. And if you look at the bonding, the service of that obligation that the state would be incurring, they showed, the amount of money that would be taxed on just the average Major League Baseball payroll team. And then they said, well, hey, it's Oregon. So every time they play a ball game, you're getting people who are taxed at, 9.9%. All the visiting teams.
That's right.
When you think about some Major League Baseball player making $100,000 a game, guess what? He plays one game. They usually play 3, a series. So he would generate $300,000 by playing one home series or an away series, not just the home, but the away team comes into Oregon, and that average baseball player is generating $300,000 in salary. That's taxed in Oregon, and that's how they're talking about servicing the bonds.
But here's my point, I guess. Why does it take a group with special interests that can afford lobbyists to come and pitch economic growth in a small, narrow sector versus the state of Oregon saying, man, we could share this burden. We could create more jobs, more better paying jobs. We could produce the local revenue that, again, goes back into the community. I think about what timber used to do for rural Oregon.
Stimulate small business around baseball.
Yeah. And another microcosm you think about, like it's across the river in White Salmon, Washington, but in situ starts building drones. And my my predecessor, the former state rep, John Huffman, he wanted to declare Oregon the drone capital of the world. Why not? Like, saying things like that may seem silly, but when you announce it,
That's right.
if we said Oregon's open for business, it would mean something.
That's
if
right.
we had a governor that said, come to Oregon, we want you to come do business in Oregon, that alone would move the needle.
You're right.
And
No
yet
doubt.
everything
No
we're
doubt.
doing in the legislature, everything the governor's doing is saying, we want to make it harder. And all we really want to do is try and figure out how we can get more of your money to do the things that we want to do.
Well, and I would love to get the negotiators. In fact, I'm going to issue an invitation to the CEO of Intel to come on this show.
Yeah. Yeah.
And tell us why they chose Ohio.
I think you should also extend an invitation. Phil Knight.
Would love to have Phil on.
Ask
I'm not on a first name basis with Phil,
Mr.
but
Knight.
Mr. Knight.
Mr. Knight.
I would call him Mr.
You
Knight.
may have to talk to Betsy Johnson. Maybe she can.
I would like Betsy Johnson on the show, frankly, because
She would make this a show.
yeah, she would. But, you take someone like that who served in government, understood the budget inside and out, and now has been out of government for a while, still very active in quite a few different ventures and boards and et cetera, to have her or others come back and say, now that you left, let's have a frank conversation about Oregon. How are we doing? How's our budget? How's our taxation?
So I have to let the cat out of the bag on this. I don't know if folks know this. Betsy was actually a Republican. She was a Republican, and someone might want to ask her in the district she was located why she chose to switch from Republican to Democrat. And then now she switched back to independent.
Oh, she's in the... Yeah, well, that's right. She
Senator
ran for
McLane, look at
governor.
the camera and show us your shocked face.
But she was a registered Republican. And then for one reason or another, in her district, she decided it'd be better to register as a Democrat and run.
Well, there are days I long for Betsy Johnson in the Senate.
Yes.
But
Yeah, I remember when
hey.
she was in the House. I long for those days.
But we have Suzanne Weber now, and that's a pretty good
Yes, it
pretty
is.
good choice for that district, I will say.
Yes, it is.
So, Mac, can you pull up we actually do have a segment. We're going to experiment with some segments. We got reality check. Let's do reality check.
Yeah.
We'll go backwards to the other slide. Reality check. So, one of the things that we want to highlight are bills that just kind of make you stop and say,
Okay.
what's this all about? So, we got Senate Bill 578. The measure.
73.
Oh, sorry, 573. Ooh, I guess my 47-year-old eyes are starting to go.
No. That happens to me all the time.
573. The digest tells us the measure would repeal the statutes that make up the provision known as the personal income tax kicker. What do you gentlemen know about the kicker?
The kicker. Greg, I defer to you, and you were here when they put that in the Constitution.
So the kicker is an instrument or a tool to return excess tax dollars. And so if the state economist's prediction is incorrect and excessive dollars, people's tax dollars, are collected by the state, we return them. And it triggers at
Is it 2%?
2%.
Yeah.
And if it's 2% off and to the benefit of the taxpayer, then we return those dollars.
And you return them all.
Correct.
So it's not anything over 2%. It triggers at 2, but it goes back to 0.
Correct.
So
And
if we said it costs us $140 billion in the next biennium to run the state budget, and the economist says we can expect that amount of revenue, and we end up at 150,
correct. Then it kicks.
then it kicks. And who has affirmed that? Was it the legislature or did the voters?
The
The
voters.
voters.
It's been
Over.
challenged before.
The voters.
What did the voters say? Every time
Don't
it's
take
been
our
challenged.
kicker. Because
You
it's
touch that kicker and none of us are going to be in
Yeah,
office.
well, and it's placed in our Constitution, and the beauty is that if the economy, all the people working, all the people contributing to taxes, if the economy generates and our taxpayers generate more than what was the best estimate at the time, in previously, then state government, through the Constitution, not by their choice, the people said, give that back. And it's operated as the only cap on spending, because
It's correct.
how many times have we been here when the economy and the hard work of everybody produced the kicker, that we've heard members of the House and the Senate say, wait a second, we got to provide this, we got to provide that, we got to do this, we got to do that. There's always a movement to take the kicker.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Yeah. I meet with the co-chairs twice a month, and
Co-chairs of the Budget Committee.
of the Budget Committee, Joint Committee on Ways and Means, and that is a conversation that occurs regularly, especially with the unknown federal reductions that are coming from President Trump. Folks of a different opinion are asking, couldn't we keep the kicker? Couldn't we keep a portion of the kicker? And that would require, 40 votes?
40 in the House and 20 in
20
the Senate to
Yeah.
keep the kicker.
Matt, can you roll back one
And I
slide?
can tell you, there's no way they're getting 40 votes.
No, I can't imagine.
So the other thing that we didn't talk about, though, because this particular bill is only talking about the personal kicker. So the corporate kicker,
Has already been taken.
it's already been taken. So what happens to that?
It goes to education. And who sponsored that initiative to take the corporate kicker? the public employee unions. And, you know,
that's right.
That's right.
That's right.
And so in the end, because they wanted those dollars in education, and, you know, there's nobody that I know, Republican or Democrat, rural or urban, who doesn't want to say, hey, let's make sure we have great teachers and we're getting kids what they need. And my question always is, when is enough enough?
Yeah.
Daniel, you would be a great game show host. You should take these questions and turn it into like Jeopardy, or even better, something like "Can you believe?" And then you read a sentence, and then we have to say yes or no.
We're working on it. This is gonna get better, and when we do,
you're going to be the best host. I can tell you.
oh, you're
Can't
kind.
you see a Jeopardy?
Absolutely. He's always had a face for radio. I think so one of the things that about the kicker, and every time I've heard someone advocate to taking the kicker, the constituency that they're advocating for, it is never like, you know what, we're going to take the kicker and give it to truckers.
Right.
Let's take the kicker and we're going to spend it on rural Oregonians to make sure they all have four-wheel drive pickups so that when the inclement weather hits, they're able to get to the right. No, it's always programs that have great empathy by everybody that we all want to support. And sometimes I just laugh because I'm just, it just seems political positioning. And we, those of us who tend to be trying to prepare Oregon for when it's more lean, always have to say no. And because the money was produced by Oregonians. And for the state government to say, we want to keep the money and decide where it's spent, rather than letting the people who actually earn the money get what they paid back in a percentage and choose where to spend it.
Well, at the end of the day, it's their money.
It's their money.
It's the citizens' money.
And the reason why we end with the kicker is because it really is kind of that transition, right? So
That's right.
you build up, show me the money episodes of money in, money out, and you build up and you get to the point where you're controlled now by a mechanism that limits what you can spend.
Right.
Play through this further, gang. I want to bring ways and means in.
Yeah.
So let's just pretend we kept the kicker. And I'm saying pretend. Okay.
Eye contact with the camera is important.
Pretend. So we keep the kicker and we put it into some great program, some much needed service, and we grow the state budget. Okay. Then the next biennium, the kicker doesn't kick. And because we're an income tax state, that's going to drop. And so what's going to happen? We're going to create new programs. We're going to fund programs that we can't sustain.
Right.
And so at some point, the pain is going to be felt.
Mm-hmm.
And what we need to remember is Oregon needs to operate just like a family. When you don't have the revenue, you tighten your belt.
Mm-hmm.
You make sure you turn off the lights in the bedroom when you leave.
Right.
You know, you buy maybe
Mighty Fine brand.
Mighty Fine brand.
I was talking to my sister who lives in Ohio. She's raising 4 kids. And she gave this example. She's like, if I tell my son to go clean his room, he's going to go in. He's going to put his clothes away. He's going to make his bed. He might vacuum.
I want that, son.
He might dust, right? But he might.
Right.
Now, what I mean in my head when I ask him to clean his room is I want him to dust the blinds. I want him to scrub the windows. I want him to clean out the closet, find the things that he's no longer using. I want him to gut that room and then put it back together where it's pristine. That's what I mean when I say clean your room. And the only way I'm going to get to do that is if I remove him from the equation, I hire somebody else to come in and do it for me. I need that third-party auditor. And I think what's fascinating to me is what's happening at the federal level is that process, right?
What a great analogy.
Someone's had to
That's-
come in and say, I asked you to clean your room and you're doing it, but it's not what
Right.
needs to be done. We're $36.5 trillion in debt, and we can't borrow to fund services. At some point, we've got to, for the posterity of this nation, for generations to come, we've got to be able to sustain this. So the only way that's going to happen is if we gut and clean. And when we in Oregon build our budget off of a current service level, and we never say, well, wait a second, this program was supposed to sunset 3 years ago. Why are we still doing this? And we've done the easy stuff so far in this budget cycle. The co-chairs came and showed that, look, $271.9 million we've been able to eliminate from the budget, or all these positions that we had created in the budget that we never filled. And we know we're not going to fill them, so we can remove those from the budget. We're creating some space that way. But now what's the next step and the next step that we actually get to? Should government do that? And I'm so excited because Co-Chair Lieber said that's what she's intent on doing.
And she really is trying that. By the way, I think we should change your name from Senator Bonham to Oh Wise One Bonham, because there's a lot of wisdom in what you're sharing.
Well, I appreciate that. But again, I'm inspired to want to help. And the way Kate Lieber is approaching this, to pay her that compliment, she has empowered the subcommittees in a way I think that is
Most genuine.
not that's never been done before, but is
I've
new,
never seen it done before.
that's new for this group for sure.
I haven't seen it done this way before.
Yeah, and our members in the meeting today, we had our caucus meeting. Co-Chair Lieber was able to come in and present, and they gave her that direct feedback. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to list, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cuts where we might go and look for some savings, and they feel genuinely engaged, which is something that we as a minority party are constantly begging for access to weigh in and let people know what it looks like. And I think about your district all the time, Senator McLane. Senator McLane's district is the size of the state of Indiana.
Right.
It's big.
More cows than people. And I don't know that we always are allowing, with 26 members that touch Portland between the House and the Senate, that voice to be heard in this process.
I've Chair Nathanson on the Revenue Committee has been very gracious in allowing a broad conversation. At the end of the day, the majority party will decide the direction that we go. But Chair Nathanson has been very respectful of a conversation. As a matter of fact, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, Republican leader Drazen and I were able to testify on that property tax inheritance bill. And I'm getting the title wrong. I'm getting tired tonight. But she was very good in allowing that. And so I do have to throw a compliment to Chair Nathanson.
Well, and I think all people, and certainly Senator Kate Lieber recognizes this as the co-chair. I haven't talked with Representative Tana Sanchez, who's the co-chair in the House.
She's fabulous.
But they recognize that the winds have changed, and that the federal government is going through the effort to say, look, why are we spending money on this? Why are we spending money on that? And there is all sorts of, people outraged and, this, that, and the next thing. And if you just set aside the propaganda machines and, legacy media for a second and just say what's really going on, they're perhaps, as your sister indicated, we need to go through and we need to get better. And that means sometimes digging into the closet, cleaning the blinds, et cetera. Well, that's happening. And the co-chairs of our budget committee recognize that it's not going to result in more money coming to Oregon, right? That we've got to realize that we have to do that ourselves. And it's hard to do, frankly, with one party in charge of every facet of government. But it's at least begun for those who sit on the budget committee. And we'll talk in the next episode about budget out or money out We talked about money in today, money out tomorrow, and
But the two have a direct correlation.
they do.
And on the money out, I know you'll be visiting later on that. But I would encourage folks to realize we have to have a backbone. This is hard.
It's hard work.
It's hard. But at the end of the day, going back, Senator Bonham, to what you shared, if we're going to clean this closet out, we all have to stand up and have a backbone. And everyone's going to be impacted. But at the end of the day, that room's going to look clean.
We honored Peter Courtney at the beginning of the session, and we had a wonderful service in the Senate, and multiple people came and spoke and paid tribute. And the one thing that came up that stuck with me was Peter. I didn't have the chance to have this conversation with him, but he was quoted as saying, if you can't tell your number one donor to pound sand, then you don't belong here. Like at the end of the day, if
That's a
you can't
great
look at the
point.
person that gave you the most money to help you get elected and say, I'm so sorry, we can't do what you're asking me to do, then you shouldn't be here. And I think that's my biggest struggle today. We're going to go into this fight tomorrow with Senate Bill 916.
Yeah.
And I feel like what I've been told on that bill wasn't that we were trying to balance an imbalanced equation at the bargaining table, but that this friend of ours asked and we're going to deliver.
Well, we do have to show up tomorrow.
Yes,
and
sir.
we will.
Yep.
And I plan to vote no. And then we'll get to hear that despite that impact that bill will have on, the unemployment tax fund and getting people unemployment for when they, through no fault of their own, are without a job, that is one of those many things, as I indicated, the cumulative effect of this puts us in a position we don't want to be. We don't want to be 49th. We don't want to be ranked 42nd in competitiveness. And Oregon in the coming years is going to have to reset. I don't know what the word is, but we have got to go back to our core mission of what our state government is about. It's going to be hard, but we need participants on the Republican side and the Democratic side, urban legislators and rural legislators, to cooperatively go in and where the best ideas get used. I'm not sure we're at that today. I think there's a good indication we're going to do that better in this budget cycle, but we got a ways to go.
Well, we have to stand up and say, these are the programs we're going to fund, and these are the programs we're not. And by the way, it'd be such a cool show for the two of you, is to have a show about your legislative dream team. Who would be those 30 members of the Senate that you would identify as your dream team?
And the best part is I'd have Democrats on my team. I
Of
know
course
that
you would.
already.
Of
Yeah.
course you would. I mean,
Yeah.
how does Betsy Johnson not make the dream team?
Yeah.
How does
Yeah.
Peter Courtney not
Make the dream team. Absolutely.
On the House side, Max Williams, how would he not be on that dream team? It's funny, Daniel, as you're speaking, and I have no reason to pat you on the back, but you would be on one of the House dream teams. Mike,
I don't think I'd put myself on my own dream team.
you would, you would be on that dream team, and you just start thinking about this issue and what really needs to be done in the state of Oregon. And going back to what Peter Courtney said, we need a dream team who's willing to stand up and have a backbone and do what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great spot to call it a night. And then you guys will be back tomorrow night, record another episode on the Money Out.
On the Money Out, we'll have Senator Fred Gerard,
Yeah.
the Senate Vice Chair of the Ways and Means Committee and the co-chair of the Capital Construction Subcommittee. There's only two Republicans that are co-chairs. Representative Greg Smith in the House is the co-chair of the General Government
Correct.
Subcommittee. in our budget, and then Senator Fred Gerard is the co-chair.
And no one knows that budget better than Fred.
Fred
I bow to Fred.
Fred knows the budget. That's why we're going to get him on the podcast.
Greg Smith, first appearance on the Doge podcast. Hopefully not the last. Well, we know we get you back tomorrow.
This
One
is
more time.
awesome.
But I think, one, Doge is necessary. A Department of Government Efficiency talking about where we go with the state of Oregon and how we get there. And thank you for joining us.
Can
Thank
I be?
you.
Can I be on Doge Jeopardy?
When
I want you to create that.
A podcast where everything is put in the form of a question.
That's right.
All right.
If you don't ask the question,
Hey.
hey, you got to ASK to GET.
Amen.